Welcome back. It's Joe Volpe, the publisher of Corriere Canadese, North America's only Italian language daily newspaper. On behalf of Go Live TV and Corcan Media Group, we're here to talk about law and reality, especially as it relates to immigration. In fact, in particular, because it relates to immigration. And with me, as usual, is none other than Mr. Richard Borax, noted immigration lawyer. He's also got thick skin because he takes abuse from me. Now, Richard,
and other people too.
Well, the important thing is you'll be able to take the abuse here.
Absolutely.
Because our viewers want to know more and more about how the immigration system works.
Sure.
Now, you and I have talked about how immigration has only one function, and that is to benefit Canada.
That's right.
Secondarily, it's supposed to do other things, and that is to accommodate the obligations that we've accepted internationally. But let's go to the immigration plan.
Yep.
Okay? We started off by talking about the fact that families are separated from their kids.
Yeah.
And there's one thing, this is abominable in my view. And
It's
I
also
hope
illegal, Joe.
Well, why is it illegal?
Well, it's illegal because, again, when you were a minister, you did not have a Supreme Court order hanging over your head.
Now, what does that mean for the regular guy watching us here? I didn't have a Supreme Court order.
Well, what happens is the laws are written and the officials interpret one way, and everybody makes a mistake, and the ball gets kicked back and forth on absolutely everything in life.
But they go to court in order to...
But they go to court in order to say, how do we run this thing? So the Supreme Court on December 10th, 2015, they had to deal with the issue is, what do we do with kids?
Now, let me interrupt you for a second, because the 2015 date is significant from my point of view, because we used to be a critic, and we still are at the Corriere Canadese, of government immigration policies. So that court was hearing a case that was generated under a former government.
That's right.
It was a conservative government at the time. And so by 2015, December, we now have a different government.
Sure.
A different stripe.
Yep.
So it's an impartial decision.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go back to this now. The Supreme Court made a decision, and what was that decision?
That decision was that no kid, not a refugee kid, not an undocumented kid, no kid.
Just any child.
Any child. No child can be kicked out of this country, removed from this country, if he or she is going to suffer any emotional or psychological harm. Period.
That's the Supreme Court.
That's the Supreme Court.
And so that, the impact of that is it goes directly to the government of the day. It doesn't matter who's filling that spot.
That's right.
And it says this is how you'll interpret the law.
That's right. And after that, no immigration officer and no minister can wonder what the law is. Before there was some leeway, before they had guidelines saying, well, maybe this, maybe that, maybe a little bit of pain and suffering for a kid is okay, maybe a little bit of psychological damage for a kid is okay. But after December 10, 2015, the officers only had to make one decision in any individual file. And that was not how much hardship can the kid suffer, because the court said no hardship.
Any.
The officers only had to make one decision. Will this kid suffer any hardship? And the question then becomes, are the officers qualified to make that decision? Do they have interviews? What's the process? And what's horrible about this is that the government of the day, in this case the Trudeau administration, because they're the only government that's been there since December 2015, has not changed the process to respect the Supreme Court of Canada.
Because there are, of course, some immigration officers who are hearing some of these applications for residency from within Canada, whether it's under humanitarian and compassionate grounds or refugee application. And what they're doing is they're saying, no, you're gone. And by the way, it doesn't matter that the child suffers because we don't think they do.
Joe, not only that, but there are cases, and we're not talking about a few cases, where in the family there'll be Canadian-born children and foreign-born children in the same family unit, and they've been here for 5, 6, 7 years. And the Supreme Court says, well, off you go. And the bureaucrats and the minister says, off you
Well,
go.
that's insane. So I have
Insane,
a case.
but there you go.
You know, I'm sorry if I use that term, and I have very, very little patience for that, because I have a case like that came to the Corriere, and we're in the process of studying it,
Well,
because we don't want to
study. Let's get on with it.
Well, you know, I don't want to make a harsh judgment, but there's something very specific. You know that.
Well, there's a time for harsh judgments, and there you go.
Well, we're going to do it. You know that last week we did a particular feature on Bruno and his family, and it just boggles my mind that somebody would make a decision.
And remember, none of Bruno's kids were actually born here. No. So when you get a case where the kids were born here, I mean, they accused Donald Trump. Trudeau accused Donald Trump, savaged him for separating families. But I don't understand something. If we got a lot of families in this town where some of the kids were born here, some of the kids were born elsewhere, and Trudeau is saying, get out, everybody, arrivederci.
Well, you know, we've received a request by one of the members of Parliament, local members of Parliament, to come and be interviewed on this, and my answer to him was, you're welcome at any time. Just don't bring in talking points, because it's not going to be a pleasant situation. But we do want to talk about that policy. Now, that's the first item that we talked about. It said that there's this Supreme Court decision. So it's not fly-by-night policy making, it's a direction by the Supreme Court.
But Joe, in addition to the feel-good and the emotional stuff and all the legal stuff, what really I'd like to focus on over the next little while is the cost, the hard financial cost of removing these children and these families. You know, Ottawa they create illegal children, they create illegal families, and there's a cost attached to everything.
So for me, there isn't an illegal family, but there are people who don't have a particular status in this country. And so the second item that we wanted to deal with was just how we get to a point where there are undocumented, or in some circles, illegal or irregular entrants. And so we talked about the fact that every year at around October, November, the Minister for I guess they're now called Refugees and Immigration, but let's call it the Immigration Minister, presents a plan to Parliament and says, okay, this is what the country needs. Keep in mind what I said a moment ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what the country needs in terms of people and the kinds of qualities they bring, because the economy of the country needs it.
Yep.
That's what the immigration plan is. And so we talked about how, for this year, the number of, the number of immigrants the country wants to attract is 310,000. 310,000. That's how many we want, because we can't do without them. And what we actually do as well, there's a particular group there that's called the economic class. I want to focus on this for a moment, Richard. So the economic class are those that make an immediate contribution to the economy. There's 177,500 of them, right?
Yep.
Okay. So those 177,500 have to fit certain criteria, and they also have to speak either English or French.
That's right.
Okay, what happens if they provide the economic input but can't pass the test for language?
Well, they have a choice. If they're here, then they either go underground or they get out. And if they get out, the bosses usually freak out because they're losing money, they're losing business, the economy suffers big time, and if they stay here as undocumented, then the taxpayer is paying a huge price for unpaid taxes. They're paying for their kids in Ontario to $1.23 billion. Joe, if I may, what that plan, when the minister stands up, and under the Immigration Act, he has to stand up at the end of October, November, and present his plan. I don't understand why that plan does not include the cost of government's failures in meeting those targets, or ignoring illegal workers and their kids.
Well, I think that Premier Doug Ford has entered into that fray.
Thank God.
Okay, well now hold on. You know, we can talk about him, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask one of his MPPs to come forward so that we can have that kind of a discussion. So, but the important thing that I want to get to, if you don't mind, is that out of that 177,500, those are principal applicants. They do not include spouses and children.
That's right.
So we started off with the concept of children separated from parents. Just by saying you only want 177,000, whether it's mothers or fathers, men or women, that you really aren't interested in having their spouses and their kids here.
Well, that's not true.
Well, no, but it is true, because the immigration plan for 2018 only calls for an additional 60,000 who fit into the spouse or children or grandparent.
No, but Joe, as a matter of reality, I've never seen a file for a principal applicant that was turned down because he had a wife or he had 3 kids or 4 kids.
I didn't say that they'd be turned down. I'm just saying that you're already building into the system a condition where you're going to separate parents from children.
No, that's not true. That's not a separation. That's not a condition. That's a reflection of reality.
So what happens if 177,500 all happen to be married men or women who have a child?
Yes, so.
So what is it? 1/3 of those are actually economic?
Okay, in that case, you're absolutely dead right.
Yeah, thank you. So what happens is you're looking at a
What you're saying is that the economic side of the pie goes down.
Well,
which in return creates more undocumented workers because the economic need is there.
Yeah, the mother or father is going to bring the family over. One way or the other, they'll do it in an undocumented fashion. Or, to be more specific, because we started talking, the second part of this is that the choice that an applicant has is either to come over here irregularly and then become undocumented, or there's another proposal, and the one that we started to talk about, is they can go on a job and apply under the Canada Experience class and say, you know, I can do all of this stuff.
Yeah, but see, once again, you're always
substitutive evaluation we talked about.
Yeah. See, that guy coming over here just hanging around under Canada Experience class, if you can't meet basically, practically speaking, it's the language requirement. If you don't meet the language requirement, then you're not going to win under any of the economic classes, any of them, which means you're going to be illegal. And then we said, yeah, but there is a way on a substitute evaluation for the guy to stay here.
Okay, well, my problem...
But let's get back to the cost.
Well, yeah, but that's exactly it. But, you know, you're already building in a deficiency.
That's what Ottawa, they sit down there consciously and they say, we're going to give Ontario 40% of the overall immigration. We're going to give them X percent of the workers coming in to the province. And they know damn well, or darn well, that the province needs a lot more than that 40%. But we're never going to see it in here. So they build in the undocumented situation, which is costing the province billions of dollars.
So just to give everybody a clear indication, when we last spoke, the next day there was a report on the number of cranes operative in Toronto.
Yeah.
So that's 97. And that 97 is 30 more than the next biggest number in all of North America.
Ottawa doesn't care.
But if you've got cranes operating, then you've got people in the trades, skilled and semi-skilled in the construction industry, that clearly are functioning.
There's going to be no solution to the undocumented problem until Doug Ford goes to Ottawa and says, Ottawa, you are costing me $2 to $3 to $4 billion a year by running a crazy undocumented worker program, because in effect the undocumented worker program is a formal, unrecognized policy of the federal government. That's costing the province $2 to $3 to $4 billion, plus the kids on top of that in Toronto, $1.23 billion.
So, you know,
Ottawa
I'm going to challenge
that in.
I'm going to challenge you on all those numbers for our next discussion. But I want to finish off this part because we were going to do 3 parts and we're only on the second one. So what happens is when you've got, to use the example of the skilled and semi-skilled, there's only 4% of that 177,500.
That's right.
Only 4% are for that nationwide.
Ottawa, your 97 cranes, how many are operated by illegals?
Well,
below and above the cranes. And Ottawa knows that, and they build that in, and they don't give a darn about Ontario losing $2, $3, $4, $5 billion a year.
But more importantly, if I can trace it back to what we talked about a moment ago, you have a situation where if you have these people undocumented, they've got kids here, the CBSA minister, Ralph Goodale, and his department are obliged in law to go ferret them out and to ship them out of the country. He doesn't
have the guts to do it.
Well, no, I'm not asking about courage. I'm talking about the legal obligation to remove them. So, notwithstanding what we talked about a moment ago, that the Supreme Court has an order under which everybody must operate, the minister for CBSA is obliged under Canadian law to remove those crane operators above and below and their kids.
If Ralph Goodale did his job, which he won't, even though he pretends to, he would devastate Ontario's economy overnight.
So you're telling me that there's a great hypocrisy in terms of policy making.
It's going to drive us into bankruptcy, Joe.
Well, I don't want you to do all of the work for the Doug Ford government.
Well, God bless Doug Ford.
Well, if
he's after you, he was the first guy since you were minister to stand up for Ontario.
Well, here I am. I'm wearing a blue jacket, but I'm not. But I had a red tie then.
You did it in the typical Liberal fashion. You did it logically, and you followed the rules, and you were negotiating. And it doesn't. Logic does not work with Ottawa.
Well, look. So it worked. Thank you for reminding everybody. I actually used to do something before I did this, but it's a little bit embarrassing, quite frankly. But Richard. This is a never-ending discussion, but I wanted to move it off
the
partisan.
It can end overnight. If all Ottawa has to do is recognize the reality of 500,000 undocumented workers in Ontario. I'm not saying you cannot fix the problem unless you recognize the problem.
But that's right. Okay, so let me pursue that for a moment.
Okay.
Just a very brief moment because we have to end. Our technicians are saying you're way over time. Thank God we're on this digital format where we can take a license with a moment or two more. But the point of the matter that we wanted to end with was that you're putting at risk all of these children, and at the same time you're putting at risk the entire economy of Southern Ontario, or at least in the GTHA. Now, as far as the skilled workers are concerned, I haven't talked about the service industry yet, but we want to talk about the monies that it cost. And you should know, of course, that Doug Ford has already put in a request for $200 million, and they're basing it on something. We want to know what those numbers are. The feds also have numbers, and nobody's coming forward with anything that's very specific.
Oh, because surprise. Ottawa not specific.
But if you have the numbers, you can at least critique them, and you can know what you have to do. So what I'd like to do is, I don't want to do Doug Ford's work for him.
I will.
Well, I don't know if he gives you a mandate, but what we're going to do is we're going to ask at least an MPP from his government to come forward, and we'll talk about this.
Good.
But I think if you don't mind doing that groundwork for the purposes of this discussion,
the money,
then show me the money.
Show me the money.
So if you show me the money, then we can have a discussion more about undocumented workers and about the growth of the immigration plan and the realization of the immigration plan. Remember that this is
the plan is a hoax for Ontario.
Well, we were talking about 310,000 people for the entire country. 40% of them would probably come to Ontario. I think the exact number is about 38%, but use a round number of about 40%. So you're looking at about 126,000 minimum. And one estimate, at least to use your term when I was there, was that about 90% of them came to Toronto, and that creates its own problem. Not for Toronto, but for all the other areas that want to grow. And we had 5 mayors of five northern cities in Ontario said, that's gravy for everybody. Why don't we get some?
And why is there a zero-sum game in immigration?
It shouldn't be. But that's a personal bias. So what I'd like you to do, Richard, thank you very much for coming once again. And if we can make this deal that you'll be working on those numbers, and we'll debate those numbers.
And we'll send them to Queen's Park.
Well, you can do what you like with them. And if they're following our program, you don't have to send anything. They just get them from us. But But what I want to do is I want to thank everybody for watching. On behalf of Go Live TV, Corcan Media Group, and Corriere Canadese, if I can put in a plug for my paper. Thank you very much, Richard.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody else. And follow us on social media. We're on all the accounts, Twitter, Facebook, corrierecanadese.ca. And we'll see you soon on the next encounter with Richard Borax, Law and Reality.
Thank you.